HOA tried to punish us, told us to stop them if we can. Malicious compliance cost them 16% of the annual HOA income, and the cameras are still installed today. Posted by First Contribution 236. This happened several years ago and is a multi-year long story. I'll keep it as succinct as possible. We installed cameras in front of our home that were looking at our vehicles. Part of the camera angles did overlook parts of two neighbors' properties, one backyard and one side yard. The cameras were battery operated and had a function where you could gray out areas that you didn't want to film. When motion occurred in the grayed out areas, the cameras would not be activated to film. The neighbors' entire properties and several bushes on our property were grayed out. We did this when installing them. One of the neighbors was a friend and had no issues with this whatsoever. We actually showed her the camera angle and she said she didn't care whether or not we grayed out that area. We still left it grayed out over battery life concerns. The other neighbor's name was Karen. Not really, but we all know why I chose that name. Karen was on the HOA board and, as you can imagine, we didn't get along with Karen or the HOA board. We told Karen about the camera and showed her the grayed out areas at the same time that we told our friendly neighbor about it. It was simply an FYI conversation, and we're not on friendly terms, not an asking permission conversation. She told us to take the cameras down immediately or we would regret it. About a week after we hung the camera up, we got a notice from our HOA that we were violating the bylaws. The bylaw in question? A nuisance to your neighbors bylaw. There wasn't a specific bylaw preventing placement of cameras, so this is all they could find to try to punish us. We responded with a letter detailing how we were not violating any bylaws or laws in general, and asked them to cease and desist. We all know how these stories go though. They did not cease, and they did not desist. Their first response? The HOA has the right to enforce these bylaws. Try to stop us if you think you can. These types of responses were, unfortunately, quite common from this board. We entered this battle with one goal in mind, to cost them as much money and time as possible. The HOA hired a lawyer specifically to fight us. To my knowledge, this has not happened to any other residents. In the following 4 months, we ended up costing the HOA over $4,000 in lawyer's fees fighting this battle. For reference, the entire HOA income was around $25,000 per year. When it came time for our official HOA hearing over the matter, we had successfully postponed it, thanks to an attorney friend, 3 separate times. There were over 100 back and forth emails with the HOA attorney and ourselves. Each one of those emails was a 15-minute expense for the HOA, and I was happy to follow up a follow-up question with another follow-up question if it meant the HOA attorney was going to keep billing them. Did I say follow up enough times? Anyway, we didn't actually want to take this battle to court, so we ended up removing the cameras the day of the hearing to prevent being fined, even if the fine wouldn't hold up in court. The HOA decided in the hearing that we were guilty, surprise, surprise, of violating the bylaw. They couldn't fine us, as the bylaws don't allow a fine until after a hearing has been held, and the cameras were already removed. In the end, the punishment was a sternly written piece of paper on the attorney's letterhead, delivered via certified mail, that stated we were, quote, not allowed to place a camera on our home that had the potential to invade a neighbor's privacy, end quote. Keep in mind, the letter specifically stated that the camera could not be placed on our home. We left the cameras off of the home for about 4 months, until the annual HOA meeting. You should have seen the look on the HOA board's faces when I asked them to explain the $4,000 line item for attorney's fees that simply stated, title searches, attorney fees. The board actually tried to hide the fact that they spent $4,000 trying to fight us over a couple of cameras by putting the fees in as title searches. Needless to say, that meeting did not go well for them. About half of them lost their positions on the board. The other half, including Karen, unfortunately, remained on the board. About a week after the annual meeting, we installed new cameras, facing the same direction as the prior cameras, only this time we installed a post in the ground and mounted the cameras to that post. The admonishment we received after the hearing specifically stated that we were not allowed to install cameras on our home, and said nothing about putting them on a post. They did send a letter to try and tell us to remove the cameras, but a sternly worded response indicating that we were prepared to fight them actually worked this time around. I guess they didn't want to spend another $4,000 fighting us. We didn't receive any follow-up responses, and the cameras on the post are still installed to this day, over 2 years and running strong. Oh man, you just gotta love it when an OP knows the book by the letter and sticks it to the Karen and ends up coming out the winner, stalling and delaying the whole way home. A student's malicious compliance backfires. Posted by Kipsy Cakes. This is a story from one of my college friends, Zach, and how he one day decided to jokingly comply with the professor's request, only to have it shot right back in his face. So, for quick background, Zach and I were both students in our university's department for fields such as animation, game design, and film. Since Zach and I studied similar fields, Zach studied game design and I studied animation, we were both required to take a series of classes called 3D modeling with a professor I'll call Professor Rick. Rick was a one-of-a-kind professor who was not only experienced in the field, but also a very understanding and approachable man who knew how to make the subject fun and easy for all of us. 3D modeling, as you'd probably expect, was a very project-heavy class. Each month or so, you'd be assigned a project. Let's say, for example, the project is a fully detailed and functioning lamp model, which you would work on both in and out of class throughout the month. You'd also be required to submit your current progress online each week for feedback and an easy A as long as you had shown you were making progress. Classes would usually be spent talking about the next part of the project and then working on them. As long as you were actually doing the work, listening to Rick's feedback, and actively improving, the class was an easy A. Pretty simple, right? Anyway, the story begins about a week after one of these projects started. One day, Zach's laptop suddenly had massive technical issues and needed to be repaired. While he was assured the issue could and would be fixed, he wouldn't be able to get the laptop back before the following week, after the deadline for the upcoming progress report was due. Not only was this a problem because Zach couldn't access the progress he had already made on the project, but also because these projects required a very specific type of software that you couldn't access on any normal school computer. These projects also required hours to work on, so he couldn't just borrow a laptop to use to finish the project. So, Zach had no choice to talk to Professor Rick about his issue. Thankfully, Rick understood what was going on because, like any person would in this industry, he knew how unpredictable technology could be and that the issues tended to happen. On top of that, he knew already that Zach had been working on his project in class, so he knew Zach wasn't lying. So, when Zach asked what he could do for the upcoming progress report, Professor Rick said, "Well, just submit whatever you've got and I'll grade it. Don't worry about it." Now, Zach knew what Professor Rick probably wanted. Since we were required to submit progress reports each week, Zach could have easily used a campus computer to download a previous file and resubmit it with no issue. However, Zach had another idea. See, Zach is a huge fan of dry humor. So is Professor Rick. So Zach thought it would be funny to submit something different for Professor Rick instead of what he'd expect. So he submitted a simple one-page Word document with "sorry" in big letters written in the middle. He then left a comment attached to the submission saying, "Sorry, I didn't think you'd care what I turned in, so I gave you this." Zach then moved on with his day. Professor Rick said nothing to him about it, and about a week passed. Like I mentioned before, most of these projects were guaranteed A's, so when Zach saw the notification that the grade was submitted, he didn't think to check it right away. Then, one day, while looking through the app we use to submit our work, he noticed something off. His grade for 3D modeling, which was once an A, was now a C-. He was completely confused, and upon investigating what could be the cause, he noticed one grade that looked very different. The progress report received a grade of -200 out of 100. Zach was absolutely stunned. How the heck was a negative score even possible? He quickly checked the submission and saw underneath his comment was a reply from Professor Rick that said, "Sorry, I didn't think you'd care what grade I gave you, so I just gave you this instead." Zach panicked, thinking he made Professor Rick angry, and as soon as the next class started, he approached the professor with his laptop open to the grade to ask what the heck was happening. But before he could speak, Professor Rick saw the grade, saw Zach's face, and started laughing. He laughed hard. Zach then realized what was going on and started laughing too. The grade was changed to a 100 of 100 the very next day. Gosh, I genuinely loved my professors. Professor Rick sounds like a guy you'd want to hang out with and have a beer with. I don't like beer, and he's a college professor, so he probably shouldn't. But he just sounds like a good guy, don't you think so? But the trick was definitely a little bit scary, for sure. Want to lie about your natural hair color? Have fun with an awful dye job. Posted by Wisconsin, Ohio native 9. My wife, 22, and I, 22, got my little sister, 12, some semi-permanent red hair dye for Christmas. She really wanted it and was very excited to use it on herself and her cousins. The hair dye is bright red, assuming you're light blonde or bleached, but sis had dark brunette hair, so the dye becomes a dark burgundy on her. Everything that follows is what she told me. I wasn't there for any of it. Sis brought her hair dye to family Christmas at Grandma's so she could share it with our plethora of cousins. One of our cousins, Anna, 16, is pretty entitled. She's a compulsive liar and manipulator. I keep my audio recording app handy on my phone when I'm around her, should I have to use it, because I don't trust her. She also has done some mild bullying and take advantage of sister in the past year or two. Anna asked sis to have her hair dyed. Anna obviously has had her hair bleached to a medium light or a light blonde. Sis asked Anna, hey, is your hair bleached or dyed? If it is, then it's going to turn out really bright and look crazy. Anna said, no, what? This is my natural hair color. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. Sis and my other cousins share a knowing look before getting to work. After they let the paste sit for a reasonable amount of time, they wash it out. Instead of pretty mauve accents like in Sis's hair, the back of Anna's hair looks like a bright, clowny, patchy mashup. Anna's response, I kid you not, was to look surprised and say, oh yeah, I did bleach my hair. I totally forgot this wasn't my natural hair color. At this moment, Anna's mother came in and was not happy. Anna wanted to take even more dye from my sister to try to even out the clown hair she'd given herself, but Anna's mom stood up for my sister and wouldn't let her take more. This dye is only semi-permanent, but it'll still take 10 to 15 shampoos to be fully washed out. I only learned all this because I took my sister out on a breakfast date after New Year's. I was worried that Anna had bullied sis into using as much hair dye as she did. When I asked about it, it turns out sis just wanted to let Anna pay for her obvious lie. Kids are honest. I mean, they'll tell you what they think even if it's not socially acceptable, and they'll tell you what you maybe sometimes don't want to hear. Ouch. What do you think? Way to go, OP. If I have to do it, you have to do it too. Posted by Defrost. This happened years ago with my ex. They're an ex for a reason. My ex and I had a long-distance relationship for a number of years. We would fight very often, and I always blamed it on the long distance. What I told myself was that we are both so stressed from the long distance, and the stress leads us to fighting all the time. After a couple years of long distance, she moved in with me after she got a new job in the state that I lived at. We lived in a small 1-bed, 1-bath, but it was big enough for the both of us. Unfortunately, we continued to fight even more so than when we were long distance. One time, I came back from the gym. I was super tired. Went to the bathroom to pee, and I get some food after and so on. Well, because I was tired, I forgot to put the toilet seat down. This one time. I always put down both the seat and the lid. It just so happened that I didn't do it this time. She comes into the bathroom after me and makes the biggest deal about putting the toilet seat down, how I don't care about her, and so on. I didn't want to get into a huge fight over nothing, so I simply said, hey, I'm sorry, I'll make sure to put it down. She pees, and then I go in the shower after her. I noticed the seat was down, obviously, but the toilet lid was still up. She never put the lid down. So malicious compliance kicked into overdrive. I said to her, can you make sure you put the toilet lid down whenever you use the bathroom? And basically repeated everything she had said to me about not caring about her and so on. Petty, sure, but if she's going to make a big stink about something so small, so am I. So she yelled at me and said I was being ridiculous, and I basically repeated everything she said to me right back to her in regards to putting down the toilet seat and the toilet lid. If I have to pick up something and put it back down every time I pee, so do you. You don't get special treatment. This was a huge screaming fight, and she basically said, no, I'm not going to do it. I continued to put the seat and lid down every time, and she never put the lid down, and I would always make sure to tell her she didn't do it, and how it showed that she didn't care. The relationship didn't last much longer after that, and we were just not right for each other. I should have noticed it years prior, but I used the long distance excuse instead of saying that we were a bad match. Oh man, I just feel like there's more to it. I like to see the other side. I feel like there are deeper issues of toxic things that are present, not just toilet seat, like telling her, oh, you don't care about me, and just, I see some red flags here. I'm sorry, OP, but I see him here, man. Ruin everyone's paycheck for doing my job? Click the video on your screen to watch that next and subscribe for more stories.